One of the main tenets of Star Citizen is multi-crew gameplay, where a fully crewed ship can potentially be more effective than bringing those same people in their own ships. Achieving this gameplay goal will require members of the ship's crew completing tasks such as actively repairing, defending, and piloting the ship as a team. A big part of the gameplay will involve the use of turrets to defend from or attack adversaries. From the initial introduction of the first multi-crew ship until now in patch 3.3.5, the turret gameplay has been particularly lackluster. Although many changes have been made to attempt to improve turrets in general, many things still hold them back from being truly fun and effective. This can be attributed to a few things. Combined ship and turret movement, consisting of tracking speed and motion around the aim point, aim and lead calculation, view, and firepower. Ironically, all of these problems were solved by the end of World War II in aircraft such as the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. B-29s, designed in the early 1940s, are equipped with the then state-of-the-art computer-controlled General Electric Central Station Fire Control System. A single gunner could control up to 3 out of the 5 fitted turrets remotely at the same time. This system also compensated for speed, acceleration, distance, gravity, temperature, humidity, parallax, and the lead required to hit the fast-moving target with pinpoint accuracy. Combined ship and turret movement. Before patch 3.3, ship movement affecting the turret would not be compensated for, causing the ship to turn the turret, making aiming even more difficult. Patch 3.3 introduced gyroscopic stability to the ship's turrets, allowing them to be less affected by the ship's movement. With this change, the turret would only move when the gunner moved or the limits of the turret's movement were reached. Although this went a long way towards making turrets better to use, it did not fix the underlying issues, which are tracking speed and the motion around the aim point. Tracking speed. With the current artificially limited tracking speed of turrets, if the rotation of the ship is faster than the tracking speed of the turret, the gunner's aim point will still be thrown off by the ship's movements. Currently, the tracking speed of the ship's turrets and the attached weapons along the azimuth and elevation is intentionally made to feel like the mechanical parts of the turret are really working to move them around. Although there is an element of balance that can be applied to tracking speeds of gimbals for pilot-controlled weapons, the gimbal speed of ship turrets is far too slow to make them effective against fast-moving targets, such as fighters and small single-seater ships. In addition, small movements of the mouse are not translated into the game, making fine aiming very frustrating. Fixing this is as simple as increasing the turret's tracking speed as fast as the mouse or controller can be moved so that they can track and kill fast-moving targets. This change alone would make a massive difference. The B-29 Superfortress turrets are designed so they can track as quickly as the gunner can move the sight to aim, and this is technology designed and built in the 1940s during World War II. Turret motion around the aim point. Tracking of turrets currently require the operator to rotate the turret around its azimuth and elevation directly by moving the mouse or controller. Although at first blush this seems logical, in use it's suboptimal as the operator is having to concentrate more on actually moving the turret than aiming at their target. Add to this the problem of the movement of the target and the movement of the ship and it becomes a much bigger issue. Instead of the player having to change the attitude of the turret manually, the turret should orient itself in relation to the player's aim point automatically. In this way, the player can simply track the target with the mouse cursor and the turret's weapons move to achieve the desired aim point. This will reduce the workload on gunners by removing the conscious effort of using the controller to move the turret instead of allowing the player to simply aim. This is similar to interactive mode that already exists and is available to pilots when using a mouse, and it is absurd this advantage exists for a pilot but not for a dedicated manned turret. Aiming and lead calculation. Lead is calculated by the ITTS system, which displays a lead or lag pit for the gunner to aim with the same way that the pilot does. Although this system, when accurate, works well for a pilot, it adds yet another layer of complexity to the gunner's role. As the ITTS system has to compensate for the target's motion, the ship's motion, the range and the projectile velocity to be able to display an accurate aim point, this can cause the pip to appear to bounce around due to the amount of motion between all the moving elements. The GE gunnery control system as used on the B-29 made this task easier by only requiring the gunner to aim directly at the target and the weapons could gimbal to the required lead angle automatically. Adopting this approach would be ideal for a turret, but it would essentially change the current system from aiming at a lead pip to aiming at the target itself, and the weapons would move to compensate for the lead required automatically. This would require all turreted weapons to be gimbaled at their mounts as they are for gimbaled weapons to allow for the system to operate correctly and not affect the turret directly. View. Turrets, much like many cockpits, appear to have been built with the view of the MFDs more in mind than the ability of the operator or pilot to see their target, or even where they are going. The view from most turrets in Star Citizen is very constrained with suboptimal seating position, where the operator is buried deep down inside the turret's housing instead of aligning their view with the built-in windows, with some even having structure blocking their view, reducing the gunner's situational awareness. For example, in the Cutlass, you have the ability to see so much more by simply raising the seat level to allow for the operator to see over the front of the ship while being able to see the pilot's target to combine their firepower. Fixing this is easily achieved by raising the operator so that their head aligns with windows and looks over the MFDs or other controls rather than having them always in their lower third of their view. Ultimately, the radar display for a turret gunner is of little use and could be replaced with target direction arrows around the outside edge of their HUD. Placing the target and the system's information onto the helmet mounted display, or CVI, would eliminate the need for the MFDs in turrets at all. Although not directly to do with turrets, the shield splash effect needs to be toned right down, as currently any hit on the shields in your field of view blinds the gunner to the point that they can no longer see their target. This gives the attacking ship an even bigger advantage that the defending ship has no way to mitigate against. Firepower. Many turrets do not have the firepower to be of any threat to a fighter, let alone a larger ship, making them easily ignorable. Firepower should be based upon the intended role the turret is designed for, whether that be for military offensive use or civilian defensive use. The amount of DPS must vary accordingly. The difference here is pronounced. With few exceptions, turret roles have been homogeneous, and part of the intent of this video is to give my suggestions as to how turrets could function. By splitting them into different roles, we can begin to break down how and why those differences matter, instead of focusing on raw hardpoint size. In a military offensive role, for instance, only the Hurricane and Hammerhead turrets have sufficient DPS to exceed the firepower of even light fighters. Consider the difference in DPS between a turret on a medium-sized multi-crew ship and that of a light fighter, for example the Gladius. The Gladius has 3 size 3 weapon mounts. To make any offensive turret make sense, it must have at least this kind of firepower to make them viable compared to bringing another fighter to the mix, and foregoing that ship's additional ability to maneuver its weapons into a firing solution, something the turret cannot do. Ships like the Hammerhead, Vanguard or Hurricane all fill a military offensive role and need to have sufficient firepower. In essence, an offensive turret should be balanced against a light or a medium fighter. As an example of the civilian defensive role, turrets on an Orion would ideally supplement escorting ships. This would mean that the firepower of the turrets on the civilian vessel would be at the lower end of the scale when compared to military vessels, and would not be intended to outright kill opponents on their own. From a gameplay perspective, Orion captains would want escorts, and their turrets would only help chip away at attackers rather than be expected to kill them. In fact, those turrets might be manned by the same crew that were operating mining lasers minutes before, whereas a military offensive turret would be expected to have a dedicated crew member along for the ride. The Retaliators turrets are used in a defensive sense, but are also mounted on a large military bomber. These require enough firepower to justify the additional manpower to make bringing 1 Retaliator instead of 3 Eclipses a reasonable choice. From a gameplay perspective, it seems reasonable that a single manned turret could not kill a fighter flown with intelligence, else a Retaliator would be an anti-fighter corvette like the Hammerhead rather than a bomber. 2 manned turrets worth of weapons to deter or kill a fighter would require some cooperation, but not much. 3 begins to look like a legitimate focused fire and potentially good team-oriented gameplay. In the current state of the systems related to turrets as discussed so far, 3 turrets worth of size 2 weapons do not accomplish the goal of deterring or killing an attacking fighter. This not only speaks to the problems with turrets, but also shows the need for better balanced DPS across the weapon size range, especially smaller sizes. The weapons mounted on turrets of mid-size offense-oriented ships, perhaps even purposely powerful multi-purpose ships like the Constellation, should have enough firepower that they can be effective over the option of bringing an additional combat ship. This would make them something to be feared and respected by anyone flying a single-seater ship, rather than just being ignored. Other options include correcting the location of some ships so that firing arcs intersect or overlap, so that weapons can be aimed at the same target at the same time, combining the firepower of those turrets. These turrets could be controlled remotely in the same way that the turrets in the B-29 were, allowing one gunner to use 2 or more turrets at one time. Attempting to decrease the manpower costs of turrets without increasing overall turret strength is unlikely to fix many of the problems facing them, but at least the manpower cost combined with a lower single turret DPS could be a trade-off. Some of the examples of how these changes would make sense can be found in the description below. Multi-crew ships will rely on gameplay associated with them for being fun. Ensuring turrets are fun and functional is a must before they can become the first option for crew members in a multi-crew ship rather than an afterthought. Good hunting, pilots. For more information on how spacecraft systems work in Star Citizen, please refer to the spacecraft flight manuals found on the RSI website. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching.